what we want to do once we make those identifications is we want to understand what the risks are intrinsic to using that technology and to having that data. Once we understand that, we can take actions to mitigate those risks. And this is a continuous process. And why is it continuous? Technology changes really quickly, right? Like I really like the little 3.5 floppy there. I think some of us remember those back in the day, but just look at how far technology comes. Every time I get into a new vehicle, I'm always surprised at the extra technology in there. And then so how we interact with technology also changes very, very quickly. I do almost everything on my phone now. 5 years ago, I didn't, right? It's become ubiquitous in our day-to-day lives. And unfortunately, threat actors, the bad guys, they know that, and they abuse technology as quickly as it changes. So because of all this, cybersecurity is never done. Technology changes so quickly that we have to be constantly doing that loop of identification, understanding, and then taking the actions to mitigate them.
Yep. Sean, do you want to add a couple thoughts here?
I think Alyssa hit the nail on the head there. I think the key is it's not about the destination, it's the journey. I had someone recently frustrated about some of the new requirements coming out for vendors of Department of Defense, and they said, well, it's going to just keep changing. There's no way to beat the actors. And I went, well, we also know that we're all born to eventually die, but doesn't mean that we don't work out each day and try to eat right, and it's a daily struggle. So you got to keep it going.
I like that.
So Alyssa, you mentioned kind of risk management as a critical component of protecting a network. Can you add some thoughts here?
Yeah, so I thought that was an interesting analogy that Sean did there, but it's true. Like we do manage risk all the time, right? Like we manage it with our health. You manage it with your house, right? What do we do when we're leaving our house to go to the office? We lock the door, and we're managing the risk of somebody trying to come into our house. And then when we get to the office, right? Maybe we have a key fob to get into the office. We're managing risk there, right? We're managing who can go in and out of our space. When we get in the car, to use a car analogy again, the first thing we do, after our phone pairs and we get our music going, is we clip in our seatbelt, right? And it's become so second nature, but if you stop and think about it, we're actually managing risk in those moments. So if we take those ideas, those other aspects in life where we manage risk and apply it to technology, you can think of it as, the type of bullseye that we are to the bad guy, right? So if we can take all those lessons and understand our risks and learn how to manage them and mitigate them and make ourselves the smallest possible target for the bad guy, that's the end goal. Like Sean said, we're all going to live and die. Like it's never perfect. We can't make it perfect. We can't make it zero, but we can make it as small as possible.
Yeah, for sure. That's super important points. Sean, you want to chime in?
No, I think that covers it.
Alrighty, so we've kind of talked at cybersecurity from kind of a 30,000 foot view. Maybe we can let's start to narrow down here and focus on how this specifically, in fact, impacts the financial sector. Specifically, you want to kind of dive into that, Alyssa?
Yeah, sure. So I think one of the biggest things about this sector is you guys are just very highly targeted, right? Cyber criminals want money and they're going to go where the money is. So you guys are a favorite target of cyber criminals, and you're also targeted by better cyber criminals, right? There's a difference between the criminal that goes into a convenience store to rob the convenience store, and then the Ocean 11 style robbing of a big casino and all that, right? Like, so the sheer caliber of the people that are going after financial institutions, because they know they're better protected, they're better. So what's the impact there? So you guys also have to do a lot more continuous monitoring. You need to be adaptive. You need to be resilient. You need to be better because better people are targeting you. And then actually the highest level of threat actor can target financial institutions as well. In Canada and the States, the financial institutions are considered part of critical infrastructure. So that means that also state-sponsored actors are sometimes targeting these institutions. We have examples of that recently with Russia targeting the Ukraine financial structure, right? The impact there is if we can disrupt the financial systems of a country we're at war with, we can have a huge impact on their ability to pay their bills, to pay their people, to feed their people. It can have a really, really crazy roll-on effect, right? So as financial institutions, it's like you're targeted more, by better, and the outcome can be a lot more severe for like at the country level.
So Sean, you want to add some points to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've sat and talked to a lot of people that were going through risk analysis, and there's always this, we're not guarding the crown jewels. We don't have, a bunch of money behind us. And that's true of many small organizations. It's not true of the financial organizations. So when there are new shiny things out there, that's the first place that these criminals go to get immediate, quick return. And then maybe they'll expand and it'll trickle down and it'll hit all your other industries. But I know, I don't know if we talk about it more later, but there was the Hong Kong firm that had the impersonation that was happening with the CFO and several other individuals that got someone to actually transfer $25 million. And this is videos that are impersonating other people. So this is unprecedented. We've all been scared of hearing your boss call you the voice over the phone, telling you to do something, and you might do it. I might do it. We all have to figure that out, right? But seeing an actual video of them talking to you, that's just a whole leap ahead of what we were afraid of. And so that's coming, and it's coming fast, and it's going to hit financial sectors first.
Yeah, and so this is probably kind of part of like, the whole kind of deep fake. You can't really believe what you're seeing these days. You got to kind of very suspicious and critical of what you're seeing, because it's really at this point you can go ahead and use AI technologies to go ahead and create these things that look very real, and it's very difficult to decipher sometimes. And this is kind of an example with this Hong Kong company. It's like, yeah, crazy news. All right, so thanks for that. Let's pivot over to sensitive data. So that again, we've talked earlier about the criticality of this financial information, and what's where the money is. So maybe Alyssa, you can talk a little bit about ways to kind of mitigate and can protect this kind of information.
For sure. Yeah. First, I'll get into like just the impact, I guess, the why. So financial information. Just think about it. Without your credit history, you can't buy a house. You can't get a loan for a car. There's so much that you can't do, and it's highly sensitive and highly protected information, right? So one of the things that we have to worry about there is compliance and regulatory, right? We have PCI. PEPIDA in Canada, GDPR in the EU. And because things are so global, we do have to be aware about these compliance frameworks in other countries, right? And the possible fines just having connections to those other countries, the new global version of banking, right? And then in the States, right, you guys even like to do them state-wise, right? So we have, I think California's at CCPA, I want to say. But so even depending on what state you're in, right, you have to be aware of the regulatory and compliance frameworks across the board. And all of those are going to apply to financial institutions because of the nature of the data. And high value data is high value to criminals, right? Historically, with ransomware, cyber criminals, what they would do is they would get on systems and they want to cause a disruption, right? They would encrypt your systems and they would stop your ability to use them. So as cyber defenders, we got pretty good at defending that, right? We put plans in place with backups and that, which allowed people to say, you know what, that's fine, we'll just rebuild all these systems. So the cyber criminals have pivoted now and they do an extortion, right? So the first thing they actually do when they get on is they try to find all that most sensitive information and pull it off. Because at the end of the day, they know they're more likely to get paid if they have something of value to you that you don't want them selling in the dark web, right? That you don't want them using for other reasons. Because the impact there is for your clients, financial fraud, if there's a breach, blackmail, even identity theft, right? There's enough information in financial records for identity theft. And then as financial service providers, then you have to also worry about reputational damage, right? A lot of this, the financial services are built on trust, and there's a lot of competitors out there. So if something happens and that trust were to break because you didn't, like if it's believed during the investigation, right, that you didn't have due diligence with how you were protecting this data, that could be an issue. So these are all things that we have to worry about. And then obviously I had mentioned before, but also fines on top of that, right? Depending on what happens with that information, there's a lot of different legislation there that could cause you a lot of harm. And bigger banks might not have to worry about that. But the smaller financial services, one bad breach and sensitive information gets out, and that could be a deal breaker.
Sean, you want to add anything?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot was covered there. The frameworks are kind of the bane of some organizations that are smaller. It creates a lot of things that need to be done. But it's actually really helpful because it gives kind of guidelines of how to accomplish this, what seems like an impossible task. You know, you're guarding, at this point, we need defense in depth, and there's all these things that we'll talk about, but, you know, to use an analogy, you're guarding a gate, and, you know, at any point, there could be a hole underneath that gate, that fence, that you don't see, and they're going to get in. So we, as defenders, you defending your business data, have 1 million points of defense, and only one failure will cause this to happen. And it's happening, and it's going to expand because it's lucrative. And there are unfortunately governments that don't take action against the people that do it. And so there's safe havens in the world. I think that you know, any good organization should be working towards doing risk analysis. They should be looking at it and understanding the risk across the whole board. And cyber is one of those. And your data is your most valuable asset. So that's something that really is becoming the most important piece. And a lot of these frameworks are very targeted on the data itself now. It's all the controls are around protecting the data. And so that's where you would start. There are some key things, though, that everybody needs to have into place now. And I think that's something we're talking about here. And then you need to go into looking at the frameworks for your industry that are specific to what regulate you.
Yeah. All right, so let's talk about access and security concerns. Maybe Alyssa, you want to go into that a bit?
Yeah, for sure. I'd mentioned just before about the global nature of financial systems these days. And, you know, when we hit with COVID and there was the lockdown, people still wanted access to all their financial data. And I do think that the financial services sector was already kind of a bit ahead there with how they were giving access globally and giving access to people on different devices to their financial data, you know, but with every new access point, it also becomes a potential new doorway for a bad guy, right? And there's just the overall digitization of business services that are aimed at this like better connectivity and better growth and you know, making our clients happy. It creates, when we're talking about that target before, it can create a slightly bigger target, or at least one we have to be aware of, right? We have to be aware of third party, right? Like where are all the connections? We were just talking about sensitive data. Having an awareness of where all that sensitive data is, because you're likely not going to be housing all of it, right? Some of your client data is going to be touched by third parties. So understanding the risk intrinsic to that is so important. And then, you know, I think in the financial sector, you're also stuck with that fight we see in cybersecurity a lot between security and productivity. You know, it's the Goldilocks. So how do you maintain the best level of security possible while also keeping your clients happy, right? Like I want to be able to, I was in Iceland and I wanted to be able to access my banking up there and I didn't want to jump through hoops, right? Like, you know, to get your average person doesn't want, we want everything, we want it now, right? So that's a really, really tricky balance. But, you know, like I said, we have to be aware of those impacts, the increased threat surface, and also, you know, cyber criminals also like to adapt and manipulate to these new technologies, right? Like years ago, ransomware wasn't a thing. And then in the financial sector, when the Bitcoin came on and they could figure out a way to get paid, you know, the first thing that the cyber criminals did was utilize that for their own gains, right? So they're also watching what happens and they're constantly adapting. So just being aware, it's almost like you have to take that moment and put yourself in the shoes of a threat actor and say, okay, like, so this new thing we're going to do, maybe this new third party service, like, you know, how could they leverage that? Like, how could somebody with ill intent use that against us? And because there's also this constant growth and connectivity, all those regulations we talked about earlier, they're constantly changing. I know we're seeing change up in Canada. I know you guys are seeing change down there. So it's a lot to keep on top of.
Yeah, for sure. Sean, you want to add some points here?
Yeah, those are great points. I think I like to compare a cybersecurity plan or a risk management plan to different types of vehicles that you could have. Some of us could be in a rickshaw or a motorcycle. Some of us think a motorcycle is too dangerous to be on. And so we actually need a tank. So there's all levels in between. But you need to think about what it is. As we increase being in this war zone that we're in, to carry forward the analogy, I think that maybe the motorcycle doesn't work for most anymore. Like we need to have somewhere in there, maybe it's a Hummer. Sorry to bring it to ad nauseum. But I think that essentially, if we're documenting the risk and we're trying to transfer the risk, we need to make sure, or however we're dealing with the risk, we transfer through cybersecurity, we maybe mitigate it through controls. We're going through all these different things. We need to make sure that we're doing it properly and that we have a consistent process in place. Talking about the AI video, it's not about protecting against the AI video. It's about protecting against new things that come up in a consistent cycle and making, because it'll be something that we've never thought of next week, next month. So it's good to have a good partnership with an organization that can help you with that, like ITS or others out there. Good inside internal staff that own that as part of their job duties. That's important to them. I think, you know, we said AI was released, ChatGPT was released to the world, which is a popular version of AI that people use, towards the end of 2022, I think it was. And it's really changed the landscape at this point. And so I've warned a lot of people, hey, this is coming. This has made very complicated things that were done by nation state actors, China, Russia, these different areas, start to become trivial. So it's much easier. These smaller groups can now do these things against financial firms and other industries. So not just financial industries, but all industries right now are kind of on the edge of a cliff looking into this void that's coming, this thing. And so we really need to act on it. And I was talking about the eye of the storm for a while with clients over last year, and we're there now. We're seeing these huge upticks and these really sophisticated attacks that before would have been unheard of, that that are now coming. So that level of whatever you're driving, if you're driving a motorcycle, you shouldn't be driving that anymore. It's not going to work. So,
Yeah.
but you would find out by doing your risk analysis. You got to go through it.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of probably a good transition point to like, what are we going to do about this? So maybe Alyssa, you want to get started here on next steps and how companies can start to protect themselves.
Yeah, for sure. We want to, we've talked about some of the doom and gloom here. So I think we want to give you guys also just some tangible takeaways for stuff that you can do at a high level. Everybody's situation is a bit different. But in cybersecurity, we like to talk about this concept of the 3 pillars of people, processes, and technology. It's just a nice framework with which to talk about defense. And they're all connected. So if we look at the first pillar, people, the big thing there is cyber risk awareness, right? Making sure that your people understand their part, the part they play in that day-to-day risks. They have a full understanding of the risk they might face as part of their job. We really like to suggest that, even during the onboarding process, one of the things that you do is you debrief those people on some of the incidences you may have had in the past or some of the phishing emails you're seeing recently. We want to kind of keep the people up to date, right? So that's about having cybersecurity training that's frequent, engaging, ideally actionable. And the big one here is across all levels, right? Because we do see that sometimes where it's only kind of at the working level where we see this training. And, if I'm a bad guy, I'm going to go after the CFO, right? Like I'm going to often go after those big fish. So we have to make sure that there's training for them too. And ideally it's like centered towards them. That training might look a little bit different. Another big thing here with the risk awareness is, create a cybersecurity culture at work. One of the things we see when we do our incident response work is there's that optimism bias that people have where they didn't think it was going to happen to them. They didn't think they had information that was valuable enough. And we really need to break that down and create that healthy paranoia we were talking about before in our day-to-day work, because assume that you're being targeted all the time. I think in the financial sector, you guys are really switched on to that, but you have to assume that people are coming at you all the time and take actions based on that, right? At the end of the day, it's about empowering our employees to make good decisions in bad situations. But, just even being here today, right? Listening to us, like it's all part of it. It needs to be continuous as well.
What about process?
Sorry, yes. So yeah, it's the second pillar here, process. So this is a big one. And I think Sean actually hit upon it really well earlier. It's the idea of like you have frameworks and strategies, you have these things in place. So the biggest thing is having an overarching cybersecurity strategy, right? And that goes back to literally kind of what we started with here is that understanding, right? Identifying the devices, networks, data, services that you use, understanding those risks, not only taking actions against those risks, but documenting them, right? Because one of the things that Sean brought up again, which was great, was like, you do have to keep on revisiting this as well, right? It's not like a one-time thing. So we document them. We try to understand if there's residual risk because we know we're not going to get that target down to zero. So even just it's about documentation and going through the process again and again. And those, there's no one size fits all, right? These processes and procedures are going to look different. Some of the stuff is kind of similar across the board. You're going to make sure you want to have an instant response process, right? And plan. You want to have probably some acceptable use policies, password creation management. But overall, this could look like many different things. Doing some sort of assessment would really help here. Working with ITS or your trusted service provider, it's really helpful to have a third party kind of look in and help you understand where your risks are, and also what are the risks right now, because as we mentioned before, it's changing constantly.
Yeah.
The actions that we took or the plan we had in place last year might not be good enough this year, especially like with all the great points Sean made about AI. It's continuous, unfortunately.
Yeah. Sean, you want to chime in?
Yeah, I mean, I'm someone that's passionate about cyber, so I really appreciate and like hearing about these different things. I think as a financial sector person, you may not like hearing about all the different ways that new attacks are happening. I think it's interesting to learn what's happening and how things are going out there. But I don't mean to paint a doom and gloom picture. I really do think that there's some really amazing things happening on the defense side also with AI, just to use that same exact example. And you just need to make sure that you're utilizing those, that you have that as part of your risk management plan. And that's just one example. There's plenty of other things out there that are avenues of attack and defense. And so I think those are, I think it's just really that culture of cyber hygiene, of cleanliness, make sure that you're doing things, the culture of thinking of the what ifs, but also, you still want to have passion for your job and not think that you're always under attack. And, there are good guys working very hard on the other side too. Good folks. Yeah.
For sure. Technology. So how can technology help here?
Yeah, well, I really like the points that Sean just brought up there. Yeah, so generally speaking, from a cost benefit analysis, where you can solve the problem with technology, a technological solution is going to be cheaper than trying to hire like an army of cybersecurity professionals right now and get them into your company. We're having a bit of a shortage, unfortunately, in this space. But like, once again, that is maybe unique to your organization and the size of your organization. It's about figuring out an appropriate mix of in-house security and outsourced managed services, right? Because you can offset some of that risk to somebody else, just like you would with cyber insurance, right? We can, like Sean said, you can spend more time worrying about financial stuff, right? And you can offset some of that cybersecurity worry to your managed service provider, which works well, especially in the sector. The big thing with technology is automated, right? We need to be moving as fast as the bad guys. Sean mentioned this as well, is we use AI as well. Our technology, we won an award for how we use AI in our technology, right? So we are in this constant feedback loop with the threat actors. That's what it comes down to. It's like we figure out a way they're doing something bad, and then we create technology to kind of block it, and they spend time trying to get around the block, and it's this constant feedback loop. But technology is where we catch them and how we stop them. And early detection is key. Some of that plan that we have in place, you have to assume that at the end of the day, unfortunately, like if somebody does get in, we want to have like stop them there and have technology that does that, technology that allows them like to stop and contain an incident before it gets too big, and also technology to stop some of those threats from actually getting to our people so they don't have to make those decisions. So that would be stuff too, like email filtering, DNS firewall. That way, some of those things, like some of those phishing emails and that, they don't even have an opportunity to get clicked on, right? You can use technology for that. Also, penetration testing. It's great if you have somebody doing an assessment of your system and acting like a bad guy, right? Like red teaming. They're scanning your system for vulnerabilities and finding them before the bad guys do, so that you can patch them before they're utilized by the threat actors. And the key here, I have a bunch of stars, but it's continuous monitoring. Stuff changes so quickly, technology changes so quickly. You want your the technology you're using as well, to be updated quickly and changing quickly and always constantly looking for new threats. And that's kind of the best of all worlds. In a perfect world, you have some really, really smart analysts, some people in place who are enabled by a really, really great set of tools. That's what it comes down to.
Sean, anything to add? You're muted.
No, that I think that's a good point there. I keep stealing the next slide that we're talking about. Sorry, Alyssa. So
No,
I'm
no,
afraid
it's
I'm
all
going to
good.
bleed into the next one. Yeah. No, I
Perfect.
think definitely technology changes all the time, and technical people can get stuck in that. What is the technology to fix? And I see a lot of bolted on things where there's just they keep, oh, this thing happened and it's whack-a-mole. So that's the counter to that is having the people that analyze the risk and so, and that it can be outsourced, it can be in-house, it can be however you're going to do it, but really have a holistic kind of plan around it is much better than the whack-a-mole. Sometimes we come in, people go, is this expensive? Sometimes what they were doing before was more expensive. We look at it and we go, you know, these things weren't effective. We can stop doing these things. This thing right here, we didn't get into, and this is very critical. So it's important to have that wider look at it.
All right, so let's talk about next steps here. So we don't want to leave everybody in a kind of a stressed situation here. So there's 3 important steps that a company can take to protect themselves. So the first one we've kind of mentioned is getting a risk assessment done. And it should be a third party. You don't want to be proofreading your own work. That'll tell you what's lacking in your cybersecurity. It'll help you determine, you know, your system's backed up. What are the vulnerability that you have to ransomware? What kind of risks you have? And what needs to be done specifically? And then step 2 is determining and coming up with a remediation plan. You want to go ahead and prioritize those risks, address the highest risks first. You want to go ahead and have some for ones that are more kind of like structural in nature, you want to have some budget for that that can be kind of rolled out over time. And then third step is to kind of retest within a periodicity. So every 3 to 6 months, you're kind of repeating that test to kind of see what's improved. Things are always changing. So again, new risks are coming and being introduced into the environment that you want to make sure that you have visibility on. So with that, for attendees, we'd like to offer a free risk assessment, and that'll give you a very clear picture of exactly where you're at. In order to kind of kick that off, you can go ahead and go to the website that's listed here. You can go ahead and scan that QR code. That'll take you to a web page and put in some brief information about your company, and we'll go ahead and circle back with you and get that process completed for you. There's no obligation, and it's a straightforward process that doesn't take too much time and effort to go ahead and complete. So with that, let's go ahead and transition over to Q&A. We got a couple of questions that we want to get out there. So the first one that came in is, are current financial frameworks and compliance mandates up to date and current with threats today, or is there even more that we need to consider?
It's a great question. I can start.
Yeah.
But yeah, generally speaking, any type of like framework or regulation is a little behind like the latest and greatest, but is always a very good place to start, and also a very good baseline to try to attain. A lot of them are really good at not trying to get too specific into the weeds. But so then we have to think of those ones, like depending on the one you're looking at, as, so this is a good baseline. We used the term hygiene earlier. So this is a good baseline of cybersecurity hygiene that we want to have or address. But then, to the questioner's point, is there other things you need to consider? Yes, like that's when I would also get a third party assessment, as ideally from a service provider that also does incident response type of work as well, because then they're going to be informed by the latest and greatest things that they're seeing all the time, right? And they're also going to be able to help prioritize some of your investment. Some of these compliance frameworks and regulation frameworks, they tell you like you have to do all these things, but it's very binary. Like you have to do all these things. They don't necessarily give you an idea of priority, or so they don't necessarily help with investment in that way. Like, how do I prioritize and what's the most important thing to do first? So I think that they're great, the compliance regulatory frameworks, also partnering that with a subject matter expert in cybersecurity to help you implement those and help you on that road is the ideal situation. But they are definitely, it's great information.
Anything you want to add to that, Sean?
Yeah, I can add a little bit. To what Alyssa was saying, the frameworks are wrote in such a way that it does take a while to get updated, so that it is always lagging. And they're written in such a way that they are pretty high level. And actually, sometimes the controls are a little hard to interpret. So as I work actively with different clients to go through these controls and these different frameworks, a lot of time it's interpreting, well, how does that apply? and you don't know what you don't know. So if it's internal IT or the organization themselves, they're just hoping that they have something that they've seen in the news or that's happened to them that they can relate to what's the core or the spirit of that control that's trying to protect. So I think it's critical to have someone that knows some experience. And like Alyssa was saying, the ones that are on the front lines are the incident responders. And so they have a feedback loop of exactly what's happening right now. And we hear really interesting things, and you'll see it just all of a sudden expand to a whole bunch of places where I think recently we were seeing, hey, you have MFA, everybody told you MFA protects you from everything. Well, guess what? There's something out there now that's fairly automated that can steal your token and get past that MFA. And so it's very confusing. There's some things that can be communicated to your teams quickly to deal with it, but there are controls that address that type of thing. And it's a matter of knowing, have we addressed the risk that the spirit of this? So
Cool.
good question.
Another question came in. You mentioned the AI deepfake scam, where the CFO got tricked into the $25 million transfer. What advice do you have to help prevent a financial services organization from, falling prey to something similar to this? What should they be doing?
Oh, can I
Yeah.
So I'm studying cyber stuff all the time. I have my team. I was teaching a class at one point at a local UC Davis in my area. And so you can get super paranoid. Like you can get really paranoid about these things. And you have to keep it in light of, what are the statistics, what's actually happening. Just like if you were an ambulance driver, you might be scared to drive, because you see all the accidents. So I have like a secret word with my wife that I don't share anywhere because for fear that there may be some AI thing out there, right, that would call and be me. And so it needs to be something that nobody's ever talked about. So that seems silly, but your team needs to walk through, how do we check these things? How do we make sure and confirm? And when it's large amounts of money and wire transfers, you should have several steps to it. You should be using predetermined ways of contacting those individuals, not things communicated during the conversation. You should be, there's all kinds of things, hanging up and calling back, not following whatever links are sent. There's all kinds of stuff you can do. But the bigger thing is talking it through with your team to make sure that they know and you've all agreed to it. And the sign of maturity of organization that you want to get to, I think, is tabletopping some of that, going through different scenarios and making sure, oh, hey, we don't just have a policy, but we all kind of understand what our steps are and we're going to do it. And then
Maybe can you just briefly describe like tabletopping, just some of that, that's maybe a new concept.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah. So that's just when people sit around a table. Now it's in a virtual things a lot, I think, probably, given the way we're all working, but you just kind of walk through. It's almost like pre-reading for a play or something, walking through the script of, okay, this scenario happens, who's the person that needs to do what, and then they walk through what they would do, usually based on perhaps playbooks or procedures that have been previously written. So it's that one step further of, okay, we know you've acknowledged this policy that we've all discussed. We know that you understand the procedure. Now let's get a little practice. Because the idea, we don't want you to practice during the actual event because you're less likely to succeed. So I think that really helps. And a lot of times tabletopping, we did one last year. We actually did it with Field Effect here. And when you go through it, you expect it's not going to be perfect. You get a lot of learning from those things, and you put that back into that continuous improvement cycle that we're talking about. So it's part of that process. It also makes everybody that's involved understand that, hey, we're not just doing this to meet a regulation. We're not just checking a box. Like, we really are serious about this. We want to protect everybody, protect the data, protect the financials.
That was such a great answer. The other thing I like about tabletopping is then the first time you're in an incident, it doesn't feel new. It's not something you've never considered before. It's literally like practicing, right? You're practicing before you're playing the big game. So you're figuring out where you're weak and where you need to grow. That's a great example. The only thing I would add, one of the things that we see is we do see companies who have really good strategies and really good procedures in place, but they have to make sure they're also letting their employees know, like, you will not be penalized. Like, if you have to take the space, if maybe you don't, you're not filing the papers at the deadline in the third quarter because you think something might be going on, they need to feel like they're going to be okay if they take the time to try to make the good security decision. And that's hard, right? But like threat actors feed off this. They know there's certain times, right, where financial records have to be filed. They know there's certain times that are going to be high stress and high pressure. And that's a big part of social engineering, is trying to catch people when they're at their tightest timelines and time crunches, when there's the most pressure. So as an organization, having a policy, but then making sure that you're actually standing up to that and helping your employees when they're in those situations, we need both those things.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you for that answer. We'll give it a second in case anybody wants to submit another question. Otherwise, with that, I think we'll probably wrap up. I just want to thank everybody for their time. Give it 10 seconds so anybody wants to submit a question. But thank you so much, Alyssa and Sean. Thank you really for your sharing your expertise and your knowledge. And hopefully this has been helpful for everybody. We'll follow up with a recording of the webinar along with the slides, because apparently they weren't displaying properly, but we'll go ahead and make sure that gets out to everybody. So thank you so much, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.